that noise that's made when you blow out a candle? It's sort of, you know, that sort of noise. You know that noise? There are people in the world who will come and they'll foof on your candle and on your light. And our job is to not allow that to happen. We've got to fan those sparks and those flames. Which kind of, I was thinking about this when it came to this question of the rise and fall of the voluntary sector, because when the title was suggested, I bristled instantly. I thought, hackles, you know. And I thought, actually, this is a fantastic opportunity and a really, really, really good title in the current context to talk about what's going on in the sector that I absolutely love so much. Because I will say, can the sector even fall? I generally don't think it can, because fundamentally, all the voluntary sector really is a collection of human beings who care passionately about something, about each other, about a cause, about an environment, about an animal. And the sort of the legal and sort of system structures are simply a means of enabling those people to do the stuff that they really care about. So even if you took away, even if you said, right, no more charities in the UK, you can't do it anymore, you would still find people gathering together as they do across the world to support and help each other. So I suppose it depends what you mean by the rise or fall of the voluntary sector. I would say this, you know, my degree was in psychology, we're hardwired through literally millennia of generation and genetic changes in order to fundamentally want to support one another. So I don't think we could ever fail in that, the voluntary sector. But there are some things where I do think we've fallen down. I think we have fallen down in confidence as a sector. I wander up and down the country all the time talking to lots and lots and lots of different charities, largely small to medium-sized one, all over. Up north, down south, you know, you name it, and that's somewhere that I've probably been. And what I notice, I walk into rooms like this and I see voluntary sector folk, volunteers, trustees, chief executives, and they're sitting like this, sort of all hunched down and, you know, and kind of looking incredibly defeated. I was well, I'm not going to name it because we're being filmed anyway. So I was giving a speech not that long ago in a place not that far away where the lead councillor for the particular local authority that I was there speaking at this conference at, with all these charities from the local area, stood up and did that thing that lead councillors very often do, which is, we love the voluntary sector, you're so important to us, we couldn't manage without you, you're absolutely fantastic, you know, please don't think for any moment at all that we don't value what you do for us, but there's no money, okay? Now, first off, do not get me started on the there's no money, because there is money, there is actually lots of money. Our problem is in the voluntary sector is we've stopped asking for it. And we've stopped realising that actually it's about choices where money is spent. We're still an incredibly wealthy nation, regardless of what goes on about austerity. So I think some of that is we've kind of got into this negative narrative in the sector. DSC does a lot of research into trusts and foundations and giving and all the rest of it. And one of the things we found is that quite a lot of trusts and foundations in the last few years have been saying to us, fewer people are asking for money and they're asking for less money, which makes no sense. But I think it's because we've got into this negative narrative in our heads, which is, there isn't any money, the government doesn't listen to us, they don't appreciate us, so on and so forth. Anyway, I'm sat there in this room, and I see, and in response to this, you know, perfectly charming person saying, we think you're absolutely wonderful, but there isn't any money, what response do you think there was in the room from all this group of people? They slumped even lower in their seats. And that frustrates me so much. I think, yes, we've been beaten up and battered a bit as a sector recently, but whatever happened to our blooming gumption? Well, that happened to us actually standing up. Anyway, I did it for them. And what I said is I basically spent the next 20 minutes telling off the people in the room, saying, what are you doing? She's just stood there and said there isn't any money. And not one of you have stood up and said, well, actually, I think there is, or can we engage, or can we debate, or can we argue with you about it? You know, we need to stand up and be prouder. You know, it makes me particularly angry because this society, our society in Britain, cannot function without the work of the voluntary sector. It literally can't function. If we had to pay, if the NHS had to pay for the services that charities provide in order to support the NHS, we would literally be bankrupt as a nation. And that's just the NHS, never mind social care or anything like that. And do we as a sector behave as if we matter? No. We listen to all the hype. We wander around. We get embarrassed about asking for money. We act as if we're ashamed of what we do, as if we're embarrassed. Well, I am not embarrassed to work for charities. I am not embarrassed at all to ask for money, because without money, we cannot serve the people that we need to serve. And I think we've got to, as I said to them, sit up straight, stick your chins out and be proud and be bold about what we do. Don't get me wrong, we're human beings in the voluntary sector. We're not saints. We like to act as if we are, you know, but we must not be embarrassed about the work that we do. I have people who say, like, one of the phrases I was saying to James earlier, I hate this phrase, the new normal. This is the new normal, we've got to accept it. We're the voluntary sector. We don't accept the new normal. That's ridiculous. We don't accept the status quo. We don't say there isn't any money, let's not ask for it. We can't change the law. We're not allowed to lobby. We can't campaign. We'd never accept that stuff. When you are sat with your beneficiaries, when you have a parent who is grieving over the loss of a child, you do not say you are never, ever going to get over this and you're never, ever going to feel better. You might just as well give up. When we're working with young homeless people who are challenging with addictions, we don't say to them, you will never beat this addiction, you might just as well give up. When we're talking or working with elderly people who are lonely and feel bereft and are frightened, we don't say to them, you're absolutely right, you might as well just give up and die now. We never do that. So if we wouldn't do that with our beneficiaries, why on earth would we do it in the environment that we're in? Why on earth would we say that this is just how things are now? We're about change. And it's one of the things that I find particularly frustrating about the way this government, and not just this government, lots of local authorities engage with us. Because for me, it's almost as if we've become a transaction, that the voluntary endeavour is about, there's a job to be done, and we get paid to do the job that needs to be done. But for me, that has never been what voluntary endeavour is about, ever. We are not about transactional things, we're about transformational things. I'll give you an example. The example I use is a canal. So there's a canal in a local authority area and it's all run down and there's sort of broken needles and it's all a bit dodgy and it's dirty and nobody goes there, nobody uses it, the community stay well away. The local authority knows it needs to do something about it because there's been outrage in the local paper. So what they do is they have two choices about how they sort it out. The first choice is to issue a tender to somebody to come and apply to win the contract to clean up the canal. So they issue a tender and it's won by abbs.co.uk, which stands for a bunch of blokes with shovels. And they get the contract and they turn up and every 3 months they clean up the canal, they go away and they come back every 3 months. 3 years later, because local authority contracts usually last about 3 years, they reissue a tender and it's another bunch of blokes with shovel turns up and does the same job. That's a transactional view of that canal. However, option 2 is to give a grant to the local Clean Up the Canal campaign, and that grant will be used to employ a volunteer manager, to build a shed, to buy shovels and things like that. And what you find is that in the voluntary sector, you will find them engaging with their local community. They will get volunteers, they'll go to the local school, they'll invent activities. There will be commitment to that place as not just a clean place, but as a place that the community can use. That's what you get with voluntary endeavour. That's transformational activity, not transactional. And I think that it's our own fault that that's the narrative that we are getting in our conversations with local authorities and government, because we've fallen into that trap of forgetting that actually we are about transformational. And the other thing is, and we don't like ever to say this to funders, but we don't walk away. When the money goes, the voluntary sector doesn't give up. It doesn't just say, oh, well, sorry about that, Joe. Can't help you now, love. We find another way to serve that purpose. It's also, for me, to misunderstand the entire nature of voluntary endeavour and charitable endeavour. Coming back to this business about transactional, if you think, lots of people say far too many charities. We ought to merge them. In fact, I was with a very senior business person the other day who I honestly wanted to tread on his head with my stiletto, because he said to me, Debra, the voluntary sector is run terribly badly, as if anybody runs the sector. But anyway, he said, we wouldn't run the private sector like you run the voluntary sector. I'm like, what? He said, duplication of effort, lots of the same. And I'm like, hold on. When I walk down the high street, there's more than one shoe shop. When I go to the supermarket, there's more than one loaf of bread. Are you honestly telling me that we in the voluntary sector are inefficient just because we have choice? Because and that's also why shouldn't donors have choice? There might be loads and loads and loads of charities working in the deaf space. There might be, in fact there are, literally hundreds if not thousands of them. What happens if I don't like the RNID? And I don't want to donate to them, or I don't want to volunteer to them, or that I don't want to use their services as a beneficiary, that there's another organisation I want to go through. Why is it that we assume that people who give money shouldn't have any choice within that same space of where they give the money to? Or even worse, why do we assume that people in need shouldn't also get a choice? We kind of have this attitude that if you're a beneficiary, you'll get what you're given and be grateful for it, which is such a Victorian patriarchal view of charities. What is wrong with us having choice in the sector? Choosing who we want to volunteer for, whose services we want to avail ourselves of, and so on. The fall of support for small charities, very much so. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Lloyds Foundation's reports that they've been doing recently about the funding and the support that there is for small charities. It's a real problem. And it's a real problem for me because we need big charities, absolutely. The big charities bring certain things, and they certainly bring weight and power to the voluntary sector space and to the narrative and certainly to the political space that we wouldn't necessarily have as a small charity. But what small charities do is they're the ones who, on the whole, galvanise communities. They're the ones who knock on their neighbours' doors and say, come and get a spade and help me to clean up the canal. They're the ones who, for want of a better phrase, promote citizenship in a sense. It is those smaller charities where you cannot possibly run yourself as an organisation without volunteers and without your neighbours, without your friends, and without all those things happening. And yet there's so little support for them. And I don't even mean financial support, because a lot of small charities, in my experience, I founded, by the way, the Small Charities Coalition about 7 years ago. I'm not involved in it anymore. I stepped away because I didn't want to have founder syndrome. So now I just like lurk from the sidelines thinking, I wouldn't have done that, which is why I stepped away. Is that it isn't often money, actually. Of course, there's elements of money, but mostly what small charities want is access. They want a voice. They want someone to listen to the stories they want to tell about their beneficiaries or their particular cause or what the challenges are. When they go to the local authority, they don't necessarily want, the local authority to cough up $5,000, but what they want is to speak to the person in the environment section or whatever, so they can talk about what's affecting them. And I think that's the biggest problem that small charities face, and they're so undervalued in this country. And yet the vast majority of the volunteers that we have in our sector are actually volunteering within and for small charities, and of course 500,000 or so unregistered community groups. So I think there's been a fall of support for them. There's definitely been a fall in grant funding from government. We know about that. I mean, it was about 6.2 billion however many years ago now, fallen down to about 2.2 billion. In fact, if you trace it, you'll see that if it carries on the way it's going, there will be no grant funding at all. And DSE, along with NAVCA and Children England and a number of other charities, have set up this thing called the Grants for Good campaign. Because our point is that actually it's a myth that you're not accountable with grants. You're just as accountable. How many of you in this room have ever had a grant from government? Yeah. Were you unaccountable? Did you get away with anything you wanted to? No, of course not. They are just as accountable. What they do is, my perception is always that the great thing about a grant is grants tend to be beneficiary-led. So you tend to find something you need to have done, and then you go and find someone who'll give you the money to help you to do it. So it starts from the need. And so therefore, the person you are trying to please is going to be the beneficiary. That's the person you're really working for, and it's just you're getting the support from somewhere else. The problem with contracts, in my experience, is it changes the nature of who the client is, who the person you're actually trying to please is. And you end up trying to please the funder rather than actually necessarily thinking about it from the beneficiary. And it's not deliberate, conscious change. It's sort of that invidious thing that sort of creeps up on you, and all of a sudden you stick your head up and you think, oh my God, we've ended up doing all sorts of things we didn't set out to do simply because of the nature of the way in which we're funded. So please join us and support that if you agree that grants are a really, really powerful way of funding and freeing up the voluntary sector to do its work. If you don't agree, of course, you can still go on the site and say, I don't agree, that's fine too. Fall in public confidence. Well, fall in public confidence. I love data. I love research. At DSC, we have a whole research team based up in Liverpool where we trawl over numbers. I love numbers and stats and graphs and everything. I love it, absolutely love it. I also understand that data doesn't drive decisions. I also understand that, well, one of the things I hate more than anything else is public opinion polls and surveys on people's opinions. I hate them. I absolutely loathe them. Because, and this is partly thanks to the OU, of course, because, I did my psychology degree, so I know quite a bit about how human beings work and think. And it's because if you ask somebody what they think, the chances of them even knowing what they think are fairly slim. The chances of them telling you what they actually think, probably slimmer, especially if what they think is not going to be in line with what you think they ought to think. And actually, half the time, we think what we think that we don't even know that we think. Anyway, there's a lot of confusion around thinkery there. And also, we're so easily led. The Charity Commission did a poll when it was asking about whether or not charities should be charged. So the Commission should charge charities to belong to the Commission. If you actually go back and look at the questionnaires that were asked, in the context bit it said, companies are charged by Companies House to be registered with Companies House, full stop. Do you think charities should be charged by the Charity Commission to... So, on the surface, that looks fairly straightforward, except that it's an entirely different beast. It's an entirely different thing. Companies are making money and they're profit-making. If it had said, The Treasury has cut funding to the Charity Commission. The only way the Charity Commission can survive is by subsidising the Treasury's cuts by charging charities. That some of your donors' money is going to have to come to help the Commission to subsidise the Treasury. I suspect there may well have been different answers to that in the context of that. Then there's this stuff around why don't people support charities or donate to charity? And again, when you look at the questions around it, they'll say things like, do you donate to charity, yes or no? If you don't donate, which of the following reasons? And the reasons will be things like chief executives have paid too much, I don't trust the way they're using my money, I don't like the work that they do, whatever. At no point does it say, because I'm a tightwad and I couldn't give a stuff about my fellow human beings. At no point does it say because I'm broke. At no point does it say it's because I don't want to give other people my money. A friend of my parents, perfectly lovely person, but she believes that nobody should ever get charity because if you're in that position, it's your own fault and you should sort yourself out. There are people like that in the world. That's okay. Well, is it okay? Probably not. But the point I'm making is that we're not even asking the right sorts of questions, so I absolutely hate them. I absolutely hate them. So I say, how do you know whether or not public trust and confidence in charities are there? And I say, you do it by observing what people actually do. So you look at levels of giving. Have they declined? Not really. You look at levels of volunteering. Have they declined? Not really. You look at levels of people engaging and talking about charities. Have they declined? Not really. I would look at what people do, not what they say. And if anybody still wants to argue with me about that, I would just say, we asked people whether they predicted a hung parliament, and most of the countries said yes. Nobody predicted, well, there are people now, of course, who will say, yes, I predicted it, but anyway, nobody predicted a Conservative majority. Did anybody predict Brexit? As charities ourselves, I don't worry too much about the wider sector. You see, I don't think the British public is that stupid. I think they might read a piece in the Daily Mail about the NSPCC. In my experience, that does not stop my mother donating to Amnesty. They might read a piece in the paper about Kids Company. In my experience, that does not stop them donating or volunteering for the local hospice. People aren't stupid. They really aren't that stupid. And actually, I think people are not as easily led by what we read in the papers as we think they are. The problem, I've learned this now, I have to be completely honest with you, I never ever read the comment threads on any of my articles or anything like that, mostly because I'm not emotionally robust enough. I get really upset when people say, you stupid, ignorant woman, you know, it's silly that, isn't it? Somebody said, you dye your hair, what right do you have to an opinion? Bloody cheek. Anyway, you get the general point, okay? Look at what people do. And in your own charities, take care of your donors. Take care of your volunteers. Concentrate on your charity. Make sure you get it right with them. And stop worrying or whittering on about what's going on in other charities. Let them look after themselves. I do not believe, well, I suspect Stuart, when he comes later, will probably have a different view to me, and that's okay. I don't believe that we are anywhere near as bad as people paint us out to be, and I think we need to stand up and defend ourselves and say we're not, actually. Not perfect, hello. Well, yeah, but, you know, we really do need to stand up for ourselves and speak out. And also I want to talk about this whole sort of thing about how difficult it is right now. It is difficult, you know, but I've worked in and around voluntary organisations for 30-odd years. It's never been easy. There's a different sort of difficulty now, but it wasn't that easy in previous. Certainly getting money, I've never found it easy to raise money for any of my charities. How about the rest of you? Any of you had it just sort of coming flooding at you? Well, unless you're the OU, which how the hell did you pull that one off? It is not an easy environment for anybody. It's never been easy. But the thing about the voluntary sector is we're brilliant at dealing with that stuff. We know how to deal with adversity. We know how to cope when there isn't any money. We know how to manage it when people are knocking us and putting us down, because that's what we do every single day. James and I were talking about the whole Brexit thing and the anger, and I wrote an article a few weeks ago, a month ago, whenever it was, in Third Sector, about how what we in the sector need to do is we need to stop doing that whole, you know, if you're a Brexiteer, the Leave people are, you know, sorry, the Remainers are just sort of whinging Ramonas or whatever they're called, or that if we're Remainers, that the Leave people are just all ignorant and stupid. The problem is, if you do that, you push people into corners where they're never, ever, ever going to change their minds. You know, I'm like that. If you tell me I'm wrong, do you know what? You're never going to get me to convince myself that I'm not. If you say to me, Deborah, I wonder if you've considered it from another possibility. I may listen, we'll see, depends on the mood I'm in. You get the point I'm making. But if there's one thing we can do in the voluntary sector, we know how to do that. We know how to bring people together who don't get on. We know how to bring people together who have completely different viewpoints in the world. If there is one thing we are brilliant at in the sector, it's bringing people together and it's breaking down barriers. This situation that we're in is no different. And in fact, if anything, we are the best place to help heal some of the wounds and the rifts that are coming up in our society right now.